crying boy yelled. "They hurt my mum. She's dying." What the cop and K9 did next stunned everyone. Snow blanketed Ash River like a heavy quilt, muffling the world until even sound felt like a memory. The town lay still under a storm that showed no signs of stopping. Shuttered windows, empty roads, fences half sunk in white. Officer Jake Nolan guided his patrol SUV along Ridgeview Road, with one hand steady on the wheel and the other hovering near the radio. The heater hummed low, barely keeping the chill at bay. Next to him sat Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with sable-black fur, golden eyes, and a presence that filled more than the passenger seat. He wasn't just a K9, he was Jake's partner, his shadow, and sometimes his only anchor. Jake glanced over as Ranger's ears flicked once, then again. The dog's body tensed, eyes narrowing at the curtain of snow ahead. For a second, Jake thought it was just the storm playing tricks again, until the blur appeared. A figure burst from the tree line and stumbled into the headlights. Jake slammed the brakes. The SUV fishtailed slightly before groaning to a halt. Ranger let out a low, guttural growl. Not fear, not aggression. Warning. Jake's hand was already on the door when the figure dropped to its knees in the road. A child. No older than 9. Covered in snow, his thin flannel shirt soaked through. His face streaked with dirt and tears. "They hurt my mum," the boy cried out, voice cracking through the icy silence. "She's dying." Jake moved before thought. The cold slapped him as he dropped to the ground beside the boy. "What's your name, kid?" "Eli," the boy choked out, shivering violently. "Eli Jensen." "Okay, Eli." Jake took off his glove, pressed 2 fingers to the boy's wrist, weak pulse, freezing cold. "Where is she?" Eli's hand pointed somewhere behind him towards the woods. "Back there, in the trailer. He hit her. She stopped moving." Jake didn't ask who. Not yet. Ranger stepped out of the SUV and moved closer, nose twitching, his tail still, his body locked into a tight stance. Jake stood. "Let's get you warm first." He lifted Eli, who weighed far too little for his age, and carried him to the back seat. Ranger didn't jump in immediately. He waited, watching the boy with the same measured patience he used in combat zones. Jake nodded. "Easy, Ranger." The dog climbed in beside Eli, laying down slowly. Eli hesitated, then reached a trembling hand toward Ranger's neck. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, he nudged his head into the boy's shoulder. The shaking slowed. Jake slid back into the driver's seat and started the engine. The headlights cut through the storm again. "Where am I going?" he asked, voice calm but sharp. "Behind the old sawmill," Eli whispered. "Past the creek. Blue door. It's the only trailer left." Jake's jaw tightened. That area had been condemned years ago. Nobody was supposed to be living out there. As they drove, Ranger kept his eyes locked forward. Every few seconds, he let out a low huff, not anxious but alert. His nose worked overtime, as if trying to catch a scent the storm hadn't already buried. "You said someone hit her," Jake said, eyes on the road. Eli didn't answer, but his lips moved like he was trying to form a name. Then, from his pocket, a photo slipped loose. Jake caught it before it hit the floor. A woman, mid-30s, smiling beside a car with a garage logo behind her. She had kind eyes and wind-tossed hair. Eli's mother. "She works at Marsh's Auto, right?" Eli nodded slowly. "She told me not to tell anyone about him." Jake didn't ask who him was. He'd met enough kids like Eli to know the shape of a secret when he saw it. Ranger whined quietly and pressed his head against the window. The road narrowed into barely a path. Snow piled high on both sides, with trees crowding the shoulder. The SUV's spotlight cut across the trail. Ranger's ears lifted. He sat up. "We're close," Jake murmured. Suddenly, Ranger gave a single sharp bark, not frantic, commanding. Jake stopped the car. "You smell something?" Ranger turned his head towards the woods, then back to Jake. The signal was clear. Jake shifted the car into park and turned to Eli. "I need you to stay here. Heater's on. Ranger's staying with you." "No," Eli said, shaking. "Don't leave her alone." Jake studied the kid. There was something in the way he clenched his jaw that didn't belong to a 9-year-old. "I won't," Jake said. "You have my word." He stepped out into the snow, boots crunching as he opened the back door. "Ranger!" The dog jumped out, landing in the snow with silent precision. He sniffed the air, then lowered his head and moved left, toward the trees. Jake followed, flashlight cutting through the dark. No footsteps, just wind and ice. But Ranger moved with purpose. They reached a small clearing. A trailer slouched to one side, half buried under the weight of snow. The blue door hung open, swaying in the wind. Ranger stopped cold, his muscles coiled. Jake stepped ahead, weapon drawn. The door creaked louder. He pushed it fully open. Inside, the darkness was broken by the beam of his light. There, on the floor, beside a shattered coffee table, lay Maria Jensen. Blood on her temple, a bruise across her jaw, her eyes half open, unfocused. "Ma'am?" Jake called softly, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me?" No response. He checked her pulse. Faint. But there. Footsteps crunched behind him, too light for boots. "Eli." The boy ran in, dropped beside her. "Mom." Jake didn't stop him. Ranger stood by the door, his body blocking the entrance. "She's alive," Jake said. "But we need help now." His flashlight caught something on the floor. Glass shards, the label of a bottle. Dry Ridge Reserve. Next to it, a crumpled receipt from a local gas station. Jake's eyes narrowed. Printed at the top. Paid by Travis Beckett. That name again. Jake pocketed both. Then a low growl. Ranger had turned toward the hallway. His ears pricked, tail rigid. Jake stood and followed the dog's gaze. The back door was ajar. Snow drifted in. No footprints, just wind and open silence. Whoever did this ran, but not far. Jake turned to Eli, who held his mum's hand tightly. "Someone hurt her," the boy whispered. "And he said if she talks, he'll come back." Jake looked at Ranger, then at the open door. "Not if we find him first." Jake cradled Eli in his arms as he hurried back through the snow. The boy weighed next to nothing. His clothes were damp, clinging to his thin frame. Jake could feel the tremors shaking through his small body, more from shock than cold. The SUV sat in the middle of the icy road like a lifeline. Its headlights carved a path through the blizzard. The moment Jake pulled open the door, Ranger jumped in first, turning to face them, ready. Jake slid Eli into the back seat. The warmth inside was immediate, fogging the windows, thawing skin and nerves. The boy curled up instinctively, wrapping his arms around himself, eyes darting to the windows like something might still follow them. Jake climbed in and cranked the heat higher. For a moment, the vehicle was silent except for the wind outside and the faint rhythmic whine of Ranger's nose pressed against the glass. Then Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo. Jake glanced through the rearview mirror, catching sight of the creased edges, the ripped corner. He turned slightly. "Can I see that?" Eli hesitated. Then he handed it over. Jake held the photograph carefully. A woman stood beside a rusted-out pickup truck. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, grease smudged across her cheek, but her smile was warm. She had one arm around a much younger Eli. They were standing in front of a garage, the sign behind them half hidden but still legible. Jensen Auto and Tire. Jake's fingers gripped the edges. "She's your mum?" Eli nodded. "Maria. Nice smile. She always said we didn't need much if we stuck together." Jake handed the photo back. She sounds strong. She was, until him. Jake didn't push. Instead, he glanced at Ranger. The dog had shifted from the front seat and now stood in the narrow gap between the seats. Carefully, he placed his head on Eli's knee. No sound, no bark, just presence. Eli flinched at first, but Ranger didn't move, just waited. Then slowly the boy's hand slid into Ranger's fur. His shoulders dropped, and for the first time since Jake had seen him, the tension in his face broke. His breathing slowed. "He's warm," Eli whispered. Jake smiled faintly. "Ranger knows when someone needs him." Eli nodded, eyes locked on the dog. "I think he knew before I did." They sat in that fragile peace for a moment, the storm beating against the glass, but somehow held at bay. Jake turned the SUV around. "Where's the trailer?" Eli looked up. "Back behind the old sawmill, past the creek. There's a dirt road. You won't see it until you're almost on it." Jake knew the place. A dead end off Route 12, forgotten, no power grid, the kind of spot people went to disappear. "You live there?" "We used to stay at a friend's, but then, after he moved in, she said we had to keep quiet. We couldn't stay at the shop anymore." Jake's voice stayed level. "What's his name?" Eli didn't answer right away. Then softly, like the name hurt to say, "Travis." Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He'd heard that name before. Ranger huffed low, his nose twitching again. Jake shot a glance at him. "You remember Travis Beckett?" The dog's ears flicked. His body stiffened, just slightly. Jake remembered the incident reports. Petty theft, bar fights, disappearances. But nothing ever stuck. He exhaled slowly. "Hang on, kid. We'll be there soon." As they pulled off the main road, the storm thickened again, as if the night itself wanted to swallow the truth before they found it. The SUV's tires groaned over packed snow and gravel. The trees pressed in from both sides, their limbs heavy with ice. Ahead only white, then a flicker of something in the darkness. A shape, not a person. A shadow that moved between the trees. Jake slowed the car. Ranger stood up in the seat, ears forward, gaze locked on the woods. "What is it?" Jake whispered. Ranger didn't growl, just stared. Jake followed his line of sight. Nothing. Then Eli whispered, "He's still out there." Jake looked back. He said if she told anyone he'd come back and finish it. Ranger finally broke his silence with a low, vibrating growl. Jake didn't speak, but his heart pounded harder now. He took the next turn. The trees broke just enough to reveal a clearing. One trailer, sagging, covered in snow. A single porch light flickering weakly. Jake killed the engine and left the lights on. "Stay here with Ranger," he said, but Eli's voice cracked again. "Don't leave her." Jake hesitated, then opened the glove box and handed the boy a thermal blanket. "Hold on to Ranger. He'll stay with you." Ranger didn't move at first. He looked from Jake to Eli and back again. Then, with careful steps, he moved into the back seat and sat close beside the boy, his body pressed protectively against him. Jake reached for his flashlight and stepped out. The cold hit like a slap. Snow up to his calves, silence so deep it rang. He moved quickly, light cutting across the trailer's siding, past the window coated in frost. Then the faintest sound, a crunch behind him. Jake spun around, but it was only wind and shifting snow, or something that knew how to hide. Back inside the SUV, Eli leaned against Ranger's side. The boy stared straight ahead, knuckles, white where he gripped the edge of the blanket. Ranger didn't blink. He watched the trailer door, watched the storm, watched the dark, and waited. The smell hit first. Metallic, heavy, and wrong. Jake stepped through the broken doorway, the beam of his flashlight cutting across the cluttered space. The air was bitterly cold, thick with dust and the lingering burn of alcohol. Ranger moved ahead of him, his paws silent against the warped wooden floor, his nose swept side to side, catching traces Jake couldn't see but could feel in the tightening of his gut. "Clear the corners," Jake murmured, and Ranger obeyed, gliding past overturned furniture and shattered glass. The trailer looked like it had been torn apart in a frenzy, drawers ripped from their slots, photos crushed underfoot, a chair splintered and half-burned in a small metal stove that had long gone out. Then Jake saw her. Maria Jensen lay half-sprawled against the wall, her arm twisted under her body, hair tangled across her face. Her shirt was torn at the shoulder, one sleeve soaked in blood. The bruises across her jaw and temple were already darkening, evidence of repeated blows. For a heartbeat, Jake thought she was gone. Then her chest shuddered. "She's alive," he whispered. Ranger was already beside her, lowering his head until his nose brushed her wrist. The dog's body went still, ears pricking. Then, softly, he let out a short exhale, a signal Jake had learned years ago. Faint pulse. Breathing, but shallow. Jake knelt beside her, 2 fingers pressed to her neck. He could feel it too, thin, irregular, but there. "Hang in there, Maria," he muttered. Behind him, the door creaked open again. Eli had slipped inside, clutching the doorway, eyes wide and wet. His voice came out small and cracked. "Mum?" Jake turned sharply. "Eli, stay back! Don't move from that spot!" But the boy was already trembling, his eyes fixed on his mother's broken form. Ranger stepped between them, positioning his body in front of Maria without a command. Protective. Unyielding. "Ranger," Jake said quietly. The dog didn't budge. His gaze remained fixed on the boy, steady and assessing, until Jake placed a hand on his flank. "It's okay," Jake said. "He's family." Only then did Ranger step aside, just enough for Eli to kneel beside his mother. The boy took her hand carefully. "She's so cold." "She's in shock," Jake said. "We need to move her now." He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around Maria's shoulders. Ranger stayed close, pacing once around the room before freezing again near the small table in the corner. His tail stiffened. He sniffed once, then twice, and gave a low growl. Jake followed his eyes. On the table sat a row of unlabeled glass bottles, some half-filled with amber liquid, others empty. Next to them, a metal funnel and a set of rubber tubes. It wasn't just whiskey, it was a still. Jake picked up a bottle and gave it a quick shake. "Moonshine." Eli looked up. "What's that?" "Something people make when they don't want others to know," Jake said. He turned the bottle over. The base was stamped with an emblem, 2 crossed picks, and the letters RBM. "Beckett Mining." Jake frowned. "Your mum said Travis used to work at the mine, right?" Eli nodded slowly. Jake turned toward the counter. Underneath a pile of dirty rags sat a crumpled gas receipt. He smoothed it out with his glove. The ink was smudged, but still readable. "Purchased, diesel fuel. Beckett, Travis." Ranger's growl deepened. His fur bristled along his shoulders. Jake glanced down. The dog's gaze was locked on the doorway leading to the back of the trailer. "You got something?" Ranger moved forward, each step deliberate, nose tracing the air. He stopped near a patch of floor where the snow had blown in. There were boot prints, fresh, and another set, smaller, smeared with blood. Jake's mind raced. Whoever did this had left recently, too recently. He turned to Eli. "We have to get her out of here. Now." As Jake lifted Maria, a faint sound came from outside. Not the wind. A soft, metallic click. The kind Jake knew by heart. A gun being cocked. He froze. Ranger's head snapped toward the door, teeth flashing. "Eli," Jake said, voice low. "Get behind me." Ranger stepped forward, positioning himself between Jake and the doorway. The growl that rose from his chest this time wasn't quiet. It filled the room. Jake's flashlight beam caught a shape moving beyond the snow. A man. Heavy coat, hood drawn low, shotgun slung in one hand. Travis Beckett. Jake recognized the face instantly. Rough stubble, sunken eyes, a scar running from his ear to his chin. He'd been warned about this man years ago. Ex-miner, ex-husband, ex-everything. A drunk and a dealer. And now, apparently, a coward who hit women and ran. Travis stood just beyond the doorway, the wind whipping his coat. "You shouldn't have come here, officer." Jake kept his tone even. "Maria's hurt. She needs medical help." "She should have kept quiet." Jake shifted his stance, keeping his body between Travis and the boy. "You're done, Travis. Drop the weapon." Travis smiled thinly. "You think I'm scared of a dog?" Before Jake could move, Ranger lunged forward with a bark so fierce it shattered the frozen silence. Travis stumbled back, startled, his finger tightening on the trigger, but the blast went wide, splintering the side of the trailer. Jake tackled him hard into the snow, wrenching the gun from his grasp. Ranger circled, teeth bared, his body ready to strike again if Jake gave even the slightest cue. Travis swung a fist, catching Jake across the jaw. Jake retaliated with a blow to the ribs. The man went down, gasping. Ranger stepped closer, growl low but steady, keeping him pinned. "Enough!" Jake barked, pressing the man's arm into the snow. "You're under arrest." Travis laughed hoarsely. "You don't get it? You think it's just me?" Jake's expression darkened. "What are you talking about?" "You'll see. You'll all see." He smirked through split lips. "I ain't the only one making money off this town." Jake tightened the cuffs around his wrists. The words sat heavy in his chest. By the time he turned back toward the trailer, Eli was kneeling beside his mother again. Ranger returned to her side, licking her hand gently, as if trying to coax her back to consciousness. Jake called for an ambulance on his radio, voice steady though his hands trembled from the cold and adrenaline. He glanced at the bottles again, at the faint outline of a mining logo burned into the wood beneath them. Something bigger was buried in this mess. As sirens faintly echoed through the storm, Ranger looked up from Maria and met Jake's eyes. That silent exchange said everything. The danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. The lights of Ash River Medical Center glowed through the fading storm like a distant promise. The ambulance pulled in behind Jake's SUV, tires hissing over the ice-slick parking lot. A nurse met them at the entrance with a gurney, bundled in a parka, her breath fogging in the frigid air. Maria was still unconscious but breathing. Barely. Jake helped lift her gently onto the stretcher, careful of the bruises and the makeshift bandages he'd wrapped around her ribs. She didn't stir. Eli followed without a word, his hand never leaving hers. He was pale but focused, like a child who'd aged 10 years in a single night. Ranger padded silently beside them, his steps matching the rhythm of the gurney wheels. No leash, no command. He simply knew where he belonged. Inside the ER, warmth and antiseptic hit like a wave. Nurses sprang into action. A doctor called out vitals, directing a team as they wheeled Maria into a trauma room. Jake stood by the doorway, watching through the glass. Eli stood in the hall, clutching Ranger's fur, his fingers buried deep in the dog's thick neck. "She's gonna be okay," Jake said gently. Eli didn't look up. "He always said nobody would come if we screamed." Jake's jaw tightened. He crouched beside him. "Well, he was wrong. You came. You ran through a blizzard and found help. You saved her." Eli looked at him then. "Ranger helped." Jake smiled faintly. "Yeah, he's good at that." Ranger leaned into the boy without a sound, the pressure of his body steady and grounding. That small contact seemed to hold Eli together in a way no words could. Later, After Maria had been stabilized and moved to a quiet recovery room, Jake sat outside with a cup of black coffee gone cold. Ranger lay under Maria's bed, head on his paws, unmoving. Eli had curled up in the corner chair, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his mother's photo clutched in one hand. Jake's thoughts were already racing ahead. Travis Beckett was in custody, locked in the town's only holding cell, silent as a stone since his arrest. But something about the man's last words wouldn't leave Jake alone. "You think it's just me?" Jake had seen that look before, when someone thought they were protected. Untouchable. That smug glint in the eye, like someone else was holding the strings. He pulled out the gas receipt and the bottle label again. The mining stamp. RBM Red Bluff Mining. It had shut down 5 years ago after a series of environmental violations. Travis had been one of the last men laid off. A bitter end for a man who already had a record. But what if he hadn't just walked away? Jake called it in, requesting incident reports, employment records, any connection between Travis and the property behind the sawmill. While he waited for the files, he stepped outside to breathe. Snow still fell in lazy spirals. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Across the street, the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the lot. Sheriff Lenora Gable stepped out, brushing snow from her coat. In her 50s, sharp-eyed and unshakably composed, she carried the kind of authority that didn't need raising its voice. "Word travels fast," she said as she approached. Jake nodded. "Travis Beckett's in a cell. Maria's stable. Kid's still shaken." "You did good, Nolan." Jake didn't answer right away. He was hiding a still in that trailer. Small operation, but the setup was clean. Someone taught him how to do it right. Lenora didn't blink. "You think he's not working alone?" "I don't think a guy like Travis can move product without help. Not the kind I saw." She sighed and stepped closer. "Look, Jake, this is where I tell you to be careful." "Careful?" "Because you're probably right, and that makes you dangerous." Jake studied her face. The corners of her mouth were tight. Her eyes flicked once toward the station across the street. "You think it's internal?" "I think you're not wrong to ask." A pause. Then her voice lowered. "Not everyone in that building has clean hands. There's a reason Travis never stuck on charges. Every time we tried to build a case, something slipped. Witnesses walked. Evidence got misfiled. If he was funneling product, someone was helping him keep it invisible." Jake's pulse quickened. "I need names." Lenora shook her head. "Not yet. You keep digging, and you do it quietly. If you find something that connects back to this station, you bring it straight to me. You don't write it in a report. You don't mention it on the radio. You come to me, face to face. Understood?" Jake nodded slowly. "Understood." Lenora stepped back. "You're a good cop, Jake. Don't let this town ruin you." As she walked away, Jake glanced up at the second-story window of the hospital room. A soft light glowed behind the curtains. Inside, Maria stirred in her bed. Not fully awake, but not entirely gone. Her hand reached instinctively for Eli's, and the boy, half asleep, reached back. Ranger lay beneath them, eyes open, watching the door. The storm might have passed, but Jake knew something else had just begun. Travis wasn't the end of the thread. He was the knot. And unraveling him might mean tugging on something this town had buried for years. Jake stood in the snow and looked toward the mountains, then back at the station. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a war of silence. And Ranger was already watching the shadows. The cold bit deep as Jake parked the cruiser near the edge of the old quarry. The sun hadn't yet melted the night frost, and the gravel crunched under his boots with each cautious step. Ranger moved beside him, low to the ground, ears forward, breath slow but alert. The way his body shifted, not just watching but remembering, made Jake pause. This wasn't just any abandoned place. Jake had read the file before. Ranger had been injured during a mission overseas, pinned under rubble after an IED explosion near a collapsed rock wall. The location had similarities. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe something deeper was clicking in the dog's mind. They made their way around piles of weathered timbers and rusted mining carts. The place had been shut down for over a decade. Locals stayed away. Too many unstable ledges, too many stories. But the tire tracks in the half-melted snow weren't ghosts. Someone had been here. Recently. Ranger stopped at a pile of old lumber covered with a green tarp. He didn't bark. Instead, he issued a low, drawn-out whine, placing one paw forward and gently nosing the edge. Jake lifted the tarp slowly, expecting maybe an old trap or animal nest. Instead, glass. Rows of brown bottles, lined neatly in crates. Dozens of them. No labels. Just faint whiffs of something sharp and illegal. Moonshine. And a lot of it. Jake reached for his phone and started snapping photos, then hit record. Ranger stood still, eyes locked on a narrow trail that veered deeper into the canyon. A moment later, voices carried over the rocks. Jake ducked behind a ledge, peering over the edge of a fallen beam. 2 men emerged, one in a worn leather coat with a shotgun resting casually across his shoulders. The other wore a pressed grey suit, expensive shoes dusted with quarry gravel. Travis Beckett and City Councilman Harold Lorne. Jake's breath caught. Lorne was supposed to be in Denver for a budget hearing. Instead, he was here, in a forgotten mine, talking logistics over a pile of illegal booze. Travis said something Jake couldn't quite catch, but the gesture he made was unmistakable, a downward slicing motion, followed by tapping his temple with 2 fingers. Code for someone to disappear. Lorne's reply was louder. I don't care if the woman saw your stash. I care if she talks. Handle it, quietly. I'll keep the permits frozen till spring. After that, we go. National! Jake clenched his jaw. Ranger shifted beside him, barely making a sound, but his body coiled like a spring. He remembered this posture from their service days. Ranger was assessing not just sound and sight, but threat. His breathing was steady, calculated, focused. The men turned back toward the ridge, heading to a dark SUV parked under the trees. Jake kept filming. The camera caught every step, every word. When the area was clear, he slipped forward, checking the license plate through binoculars. Government fleet, issued to the city. Jake turned to Ranger. The dog's gaze was locked where Travis had stood. He lowered his head, sniffed, and then, without warning, dug into the snow. A few inches down, his paw struck something metallic. Jake crouched and helped him clear it. A small black case. Inside, printed shipping manifests, fuel receipts, and a burner phone with several recent calls logged to H. City. Evidence, hard, direct, and damning. Jake pocketed the case and gave Ranger a light pat behind the ear. Good boy, damn good boy. But as they walked back towards the cruiser, Jake's thoughts darkened. If Lorne was involved, it meant the corruption ran deeper than he'd guessed. Maybe the sheriff's warning wasn't just politics. Back in the vehicle, Jake reviewed the footage again. Ranger sat beside him, head tilted, as if watching too. He looked at the dog, then back at the video. They're not just smugglers, Jake muttered. They're building something bigger, something protected. Ranger gave a soft chuff, tail thudding once against the seat. For the first time in months, Jake felt the old fire return, that mix of adrenaline and purpose. The feeling he'd tried to forget after his discharge. This wasn't just a rescue anymore, it was a war. And he wasn't fighting it alone. The wind picked up over the Pine Ridge just after dusk, sweeping ash-gray clouds over the hills like a warning. Travis Beckett stood outside his battered trailer, a gas can in one hand and a cigarette trembling in the other. His eyes, bloodshot and furious, scanned the tree line as if ghosts might step out. Or maybe one already had. He muttered something under his breath, yanked the door open, and walked inside. The place reeked of sweat, oil, and liquor. On the floor near the cot lay the ledger, the same one he'd threatened to burn before. Inside, pages full of coded transactions, shipment drop points, initials he once swore would never leave paper. He doused the place in gasoline, splashing it over the counter, the stained mattress, the corners where mold and mildew festered like guilt. Then, with a slow, almost reverent motion, he lit the match. It took seconds. The trailer whooshed into a beast of fire, belching black smoke into the sky like a scream swallowed too long. Travis didn't look back. He walked to his truck, pulled the hood over his face, and drove off into the dark, tires flinging gravel like angry spit. Jake was already on his way. Dispatch had picked up an anonymous call, flames spotted west of Elk Hollow Road. The call cut out before a name could be traced. But Jake didn't need one. Ranger was already pacing in the back seat, nose twitching, eyes sharp. As they neared the ridge, the glow of the fire bled through the trees. Jake slammed the brakes, jumped out, and released the door latch. Ranger bolted forward. "Wait, Ranger, hold!" Jake shouted, but the dog didn't stop. By the time Jake reached the clearing, the trailer was engulfed. Flames curled high into the night like claws. The heat slapped him back, but Ranger was already darting around the far side, nose to the ground. Jake wrapped a damp bandana around his face and followed. "Ranger, heel!" He called out, coughing. That's when he heard it. A groan. Metal shifting. Something inside hadn't finished burning. Jake surged forward. A beam collapsed, just feet ahead, nearly pinning his leg. But it was what Ranger did next that saved him. The dog lunged back through a wall of smoke, seized Jake's jacket collar with his teeth, and pulled hard. Jake lost his footing, fell backward, and rolled down the slope. When he stopped, air clawing into his lungs, Ranger stood over him, tail high, chest heaving. Singed fur curled near his flank. "You're insane," Jake wheezed, "but thank you." The fire was still raging, but the wind was shifting. Jake spotted a narrow break in the flame, a momentary window. He didn't think. He dashed forward to the trailer's back end, where the fire hadn't fully claimed the storage compartment. The metal door had warped, but not melted. Using a crowbar from the cruiser, he pried it open. Inside, among scattered, half-burned bags and rags, lay a canvas pouch. He snatched it, turned, and ran back through the smoke, coughing until he hit the dirt again. Ranger pressed against his side, tail thumping once, as if to say, "We're not done yet." Jake opened the pouch. Inside, a leather-bound notebook, edges singed but pages intact. Names, dates, account numbers. And there, scribbled hastily in Travis's messy hand, Lorne, DeWitt, P. Garrison, council members, police, business owners, half the damn town. He flipped a few more pages. In the back, taped between two sheets, was a single feather, charred on one side, pristine white on the other. It didn't make sense at first, then it hit him. The same kind of feather hung from the rearview mirror in the sheriff's truck. Jake's blood chilled. It wasn't just Travis. The rot ran deeper. This wasn't about backwoods bootlegging anymore. This was about control, about silencing those who saw too much, about rewriting history and torching the evidence before truth could rise from the ashes. He looked over at Ranger. The dog stood still, staring at the flames, the light reflecting in his eyes like war stories untold. Scars under his fur, memories locked away. But in this moment, he wasn't just a partner. He was a survivor, and he remembered exactly what fire felt like. Jake pressed the notebook to his chest, the charred feather fluttering in the wind. "We've got them, buddy," he whispered, "but we've got to move fast." Ranger didn't bark. He just turned, ears forward, already scanning the woods beyond, as if he knew something, or someone, was coming. The hospital room was dark, but for the blinking green of the vitals monitor, ticking like an impatient clock. Eli lay perfectly still, breathing through parted lips, his eyes half closed, but not asleep. Outside, the hallway creaked. A nurse's voice drifted past the door, followed by the dull echo of footsteps receding. Now. Eli pushed back the blanket, careful not to dislodge the IV. He had already untaped it. His fingers shook slightly as he peeled it out, wincing at the sting. He stuffed gauze in his pocket, then grabbed the bundle of clothes someone had left on the chair. Jeans, an old hoodie, and something else tucked inside. A tarnished feather-shaped pendant on a leather cord. He clutched it so hard his knuckles went white. His dad's. The one Jake said was recovered from a fire scene. Eli didn't care. Whatever the story behind it, the only place it belonged was with his mum. It was the one thing she kept reaching for in her sleep, murmuring through fever dreams. He slipped it over his head, tucked it beneath his shirt, and limped to the window. The security camera was aimed at the hallway, not the garden below. The trellis on the side of the building wasn't sturdy, but it would hold long enough. By the time the monitor flatlined and the nurse rushed in, the room was empty. Jake felt it before he knew it. Ranger stood by the cruiser, tense, ears pivoting. The air was still, no wind, no scent that Jake could detect. But Ranger knew. "What is it?" Jake asked, crouching beside him. Ranger didn't move. Then his head snapped to the left, nostrils flaring. He let out a low, guttural rumble. Not a growl of anger, but warning. A knowing. Jake followed the dog's gaze to the tree line past the edge of town. "Don't tell me." Ranger took off. Jake cursed under his breath and jumped into the driver's seat, keys already turning. The K9 GPS tracker blinked. Eli's bracelet signal had gone dark 30 minutes ago, likely disabled. But Ranger was heading somewhere with purpose. As Jake sped along the back roads, a call came through. The hospital had just reported a patient escape. Underage, head injury, name, Eli Jensen. Jake's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Damn it, kid." Eli's legs burned. His stitches had torn. He could feel it. Blood soaked the waistband of his jeans, and his breath came in sharp gasps. But he kept walking, one foot after the other, as if the weight of the pendant around his neck was pulling him forward. He didn't know how he ended up there. Maybe instinct. Maybe something worse. Ahead, just beyond a patch of dried brush, flickering lights blinked behind a chain-link fence. He crouched low, barely able to hold himself up, and peered through. 3 trucks. One of them his dad's. Half-loaded. Men in jackets with no insignia, moving crates from a shipping container into the truck bed. One of them was Travis. The other 2 looked like private contractors. Tactical gear, weapons slung casually across their backs like this was just another Tuesday night. Eli swallowed hard. A small voice inside told him to turn around, but the larger voice, his father's, told him to see, to remember, to carry the truth. He stepped forward, and that's when a twig snapped beneath his foot. All 3 men turned. Travis raised his flashlight, eyes narrowing. "Someone's out there," he barked. Eli dropped, heart pounding. He didn't make a sound. But across the field, Ranger did. The second growl rolled through the woods like a distant thunderclap. Travis froze. "That sound again," one of the contractors said. "Same one from the ridge fire." "Dog?" the other asked. Travis was already reaching for his gun. Eli's eyes widened. His breath hitched. The men fanned out. And then, out of the dark, a shadow moved. Fast. Ranger tore through the underbrush like a missile, not barking, just moving. Low, precise, locked in. He shot past Eli without even touching him and lunged straight at the man closest to the crates. The man barely had time to raise his weapon before Ranger was on him, jaws clamping on his forearm, dragging him down. Eli scrambled to his feet just as Jake's cruiser came screeching into view behind the fence. Headlights lit up the yard. Travis bolted. "Eli!" Jake shouted, vaulting over the hood. The boy staggered toward him, but one of the other contractors grabbed him from behind, yanking the pendant from his neck. Jake didn't hesitate. He tackled the man head-on, fists flying. The contractor went down hard, dropping the pendant. Eli grabbed it and dove behind the truck. Meanwhile, Ranger had taken down the second man. Blood streaked his muzzle, but he stayed on guard, teeth bared. Travis, however, was gone. Jake helped Eli to his feet. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I had to bring it to her," Eli whispered, voice breaking. He held up the feather pendant. "It's hers, Dad's." Jake looked at him, then at Ranger, who stood motionless between them and the burning lights of the compound. The kid had walked straight into hell, and Ranger had walked through it to pull him out. "He's just a kid," Jake muttered, shaking his head. Ranger let out a short huff, ears flicking once. But in those eyes there was no judgment, just the kind of loyalty that doesn't need explanation. The warehouse was quiet now, except for the echo of footsteps pacing in the upper office. The air smelled of oil, damp cement, and the sharp sting of something metallic. A single desk lamp illuminated the cracked windows, casting long shadows down onto the loading floor below. Eli sat in the corner of the room, wrists zip-tied behind his back. Blood dried along his temple from where he'd been thrown into a filing cabinet. His eyes darted toward the door every time Travis's boots scraped across the concrete. The man had taken his father's pendant again, looped it around his own neck like a sick trophy. "You're just like him, you know that?" Travis muttered, voice low, cold. "Always in the damn way." Eli didn't answer. He wasn't giving him the satisfaction. Downstairs, headlights cut across the cracks in the boarded windows. Travis froze. Another car. Then another. He leaned forward and yanked Eli upright by the collar. "Looks like your babysitter brought friends." He shoved Eli toward the window. From this angle, they could see a pair of cruisers parking just beyond the fence. Jake stepped out, flanked by two deputies, his face a steel mask. Jake raised a megaphone. "Travis Beckett, you're surrounded. We know about the shipments. We have everything. This doesn't have to end badly. Let the boy go." Travis barked a laugh. "You think I'm stupid?" He yanked open the file cabinet, pulled out a pistol wrapped in a rag. "This ends how I say it ends." He marched Eli back to the stairs, gun now pressed tight against the side of the boy's head. Down below, Jake saw them step out onto the landing. His stomach dropped. "Eli," he said, voice calm but firm. "You all right, kid?" Eli managed a nod. Jake stepped forward. "Let him go, Travis. There's nowhere left to run. You're out of time." "You think I care?" Travis shouted. "This kid's just leverage. You want him, you drop the gun and back the hell off." Jake raised one hand. "I'm not here to play games. I just want the boy. We can talk after that." Travis clicked off the safety. "We're done talking." Behind him, unnoticed, a shadow slinked through the rows of crates. Ranger, he had slipped in through the side entrance, moving like smoke across the floor, ears flat, breath low. He could see the boy. He could smell blood, sweat, gunpowder, and fear. And then he locked eyes with Travis. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply moved. Jake saw it first, the shift in Travis's weight, the twitch of his trigger finger. "No!" Too late. The gun jerked, and so did Ranger. In a single surge of power, the dog launched upward from behind the crates, crashing into Travis's right arm the instant he pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening, and ricocheted into the ceiling. Eli ducked, falling to his knees. Ranger latched onto Travis's arm with everything he had, teeth sinking through flesh and bone, and refused to let go. Even as a second shot went off, even as the bullet caught his shoulder and blood sprayed across the floor, Ranger held. Jake ran, closing the distance in 3 strides, tackled Travis from behind, slamming him face first into the concrete. The gun skittered across the floor. Jake twisted his arm behind his back, cuffing him as he screamed in pain. Ranger still didn't let go until Jake ordered, voice choked. "Out! Let go, Ranger! I've got him!" The dog's jaw unlocked, trembling but steady. Blood poured from his shoulder. Eli crawled to his side. No, please stay with me." Jake looked down at Ranger, his partner, his shadow, his soldier, and knelt beside him. "We've got a medic on the way. Hang on, boy. You did good. You saved him." Ranger blinked once, then rested his head on Eli's lap. It took hours to clear the compound. DEA arrived just before sunrise, with federal warrants and full cleanup teams. By then, Jake had given 3 statements, booked Travis, and escorted Eli to the ambulance twice. He kept slipping away to check on Ranger. The vet team arrived in record time, and Eli refused to leave until he saw Ranger stabilized. As the sun broke over the hills, casting soft gold across the blood-stained floor, Jake sat on the back bumper of a truck, holding an ice pack to his jaw. Eli sat beside him, quiet. "You all right?" Jake asked. "Yeah, you?" Jake cracked a half smile. "Been worse." They sat in silence. Eli finally asked, "Do dogs understand? Why they get hurt?" Jake looked at him. "I don't think it's about understanding. I think it's about trust. He knew what he had to do, and he trusted we'd take care of him." Eli nodded slowly, eyes shining. "Can I see him again?" Jake squeezed his shoulder. "You better. I think he saved that bullet just for you." They both looked toward the van, where Ranger slept under light sedation, his bandaged shoulder rising and falling. Not just a dog, a soldier, a shield, a bond forged in blood, in bark, in that one impossible second when instinct met purpose and saved a life. The sterile white of the veterinary trauma room made everything feel sharper, colder. Ranger lay on the table, half sedated, chest rising shallowly under a thick layer of gauze. The bullet had torn through muscle and clipped the joint. Damage was serious. The vet team worked quietly but urgently, voices tight, movements exact. Jake stood just outside the observation window, arms crossed, jaw clenched so hard it hurt. His shirt was still stained with Ranger's blood. Eli sat on the bench nearby, silent. He hadn't let go of the pendant around his neck, the one Travis had tried to steal again. He rubbed it with trembling fingers, eyes never leaving the dog. "Will he walk again?" Eli's voice cracked. Jake swallowed. "Too early to tell." He didn't hesitate. Eli said. He saw the gun and just went for it. Jake nodded slowly. That's what they do, even though it could have killed him. Jake looked away, eyes glinting under the fluorescent light. He didn't care about that. They sat in silence, the kind that wasn't empty, but heavy with memory and fear, and something like reverence. After another hour, the vet stepped out. He made it through surgery. Clean entry and exit. We repaired as much as we could. The next 48 hours are critical. But he might lose some function in that shoulder. Jake exhaled for the first time in hours. "Can I sit with him?" The vet nodded. "Only one person at a time." Jake looked at Eli. The boy nodded. "Go. He'd want to see you first." Inside, Ranger's breathing was steadier. One paw twitched when Jake's boots approached the table. Jake knelt down slowly, placed a hand on the side of the dog's face. "You stupid, beautiful idiot," he murmured. "You weren't supposed to do that." Ranger's tail made the faintest motion against the table. It wasn't a wag, but it wasn't nothing. Jake let out a shaky breath. "You always choose the kid. I know. That's what makes you, you." He stayed there a long time, stroking the dog's ear, tracing the fur above the bandage. His voice was low when he finally spoke again. "You remember Nico?" Ranger didn't move, but Jake kept going. "He was my first partner. First K9, I was 23, still green as hell. We were halfway through our tour in Afghanistan. Bomb went off. Everything went black. I thought I was dead. Nico found me under rubble, sat with me for 6 hours while we waited for evac. Didn't eat, didn't move, just kept one paw on my chest like he was keeping my heart going himself." He paused, eyes stinging. "I got pulled out. He didn't. He went with another unit. I never saw him again." Jake sat back, eyes distant. "After that, I quit everything. The force, the department. Moved out here thinking I'd just fix fences and drink myself quiet." He looked down at Ranger again. "Then they called me in for one case. Said there was a dog who wouldn't work with anyone. Said he bit 2 handlers. Said he was washed up, too stubborn to retrain." Jake laughed under his breath. They didn't get it. He wasn't broken. He was waiting for someone who knew what it meant to be left behind. He reached forward, resting his forehead gently against Ranger's. "You brought me back, Ranger. You're the reason I put on a badge again. You saved me way before today." Outside the room, Eli watched through the glass, tears running down both cheeks. The hospital room was dim, but warm. Maria stirred for the first time in days. Her fingers twitched. Then her eyes blinked open, glassy and unfocused. Eli was at her bedside in a flash. "Mum, hey, you're back." She turned toward the voice, slow, like waking from underwater. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but only a breath came out. He gripped her hand, tears falling freely now. "You're okay. You're safe." She reached up weakly, touched his face. Then her arms wrapped around him with what little strength she had. And she wept. Not loud, not in agony, just the deep, broken weeping of someone who had clawed her way out of darkness and found her child still waiting. Jake stood by the door, watching quietly. A nurse approached, whispering, "She's lucky. The overdose was bad. If she hadn't been found when she was—" Jake nodded. It wasn't luck. He glanced down at the hallway where Ranger was being wheeled in a crate toward the recovery wing. He would need weeks, maybe months, to heal. Maybe he'd never run the same. Maybe he'd never serve again. But none of that mattered. He had saved a boy, brought back a mother, and reminded a man why he wore the badge at all. In the quiet that followed, Jake pulled out an old photo from his wallet. A black and white picture of him and Nico, dusty and young, smiling under a foreign sun. He looked from the photo to Ranger. Different dog. Different war. Same kind of loyalty. The kind that bleeds without asking why. The kind that leaves a mark long after the wounds close. And maybe, just maybe, the kind that saves not just lives, but the parts of us we thought were already gone. The smell of roasted beans and fresh bread greeted the morning sun as it slid across the sign above the cafe door. Ranger's Rest. Maria had painted the lettering herself, slightly uneven, but full of heart. Inside, the walls weren't just walls, they were tributes. Framed photos of working dogs from all over the state lined the space. Canines who had rescued, tracked, healed, and stayed loyal through storms and wars. But right by the entrance, mounted under soft golden light, was a single portrait that made every customer pause. It showed Ranger, still and proud, resting his chin on Jake's boot. The feather-shaped pendant around his neck shimmered in the photo, just as it did in real life, now gently hanging from his collar as he lay curled in the shade outside the cafe, eyes open, watching every passerby with that quiet, alert calm only certain dogs ever master. Jake arrived every morning at 7:15, not in uniform anymore. The badge was still in a drawer at home, untouched since the day Travis's ring had been shut down. But Ranger still rose to meet him. He'd limp a little on his recovering shoulder, but made no sound of complaint. Jake would kneel, stroke behind his ears, and whisper something only the two of them knew. Then he'd sit on the bench outside, coffee in one hand, silence in the other. Eli came by after school, dropping his backpack in the same corner seat every day. He still wore his father's feather necklace. Ranger's nose had led him to safety, but the chain had led Ranger there. He'd tug the feather gently when deep in thought, eyes resting on the dog lying by the door. Sometimes he'd read to Ranger from his notebook. Sometimes he just sat. One crisp October afternoon, a group of kids gathered by the cafe porch, waiting to be picked up from the art class Maria had started in the back room. They played near Ranger, at first hesitantly. But Ranger, in his stillness, invited trust. One small girl leaned in and gently kissed the top of his muzzle. Maria, watching from the window, wiped her hands on her apron. She turned to Jake. "You ever think, maybe he didn't just save us. Maybe he's still doing it?" Jake didn't answer. He looked at Ranger, who blinked once, then slowly shifted to look up at the girl. Not a sound came from him, but the message was loud. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the pines, Eli stood near the gate. Ranger was beside him, sitting now, the pendant glinting in the fading light. Maria walked over, holding a tray of hot cocoa. Eli looked down at Ranger and said softly, "He's not just our dog, you know. He's our angel." No one corrected him. And maybe no one ever would. On the cafe's wall, right beneath the photo of Ranger, Maria had carved a line into a wooden plank. He didn't bark for food. He barked for those who couldn't speak. Ranger's Rest became more than a cafe. It became a gathering spot for the broken, the tired, the quiet. Veterans brought their stories. Children brought their fears. Strangers brought photos of dogs they had lost long ago. And in Ranger's eyes they all found a familiar flicker of something enduring. Some mornings a feather would drift down from nowhere and land near his paws. If you've ever felt saved by a dog, emotionally or otherwise, maybe you understand. So now it's your turn. What's your story with a loyal pet? Drop it in the comments. You never know who needs to hear that kind of hope today. And if Ranger's story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who still believes loyalty is a kind of healing. Subscribe for more stories that remind us why we don't give up, especially on those who never gave up on us. Because sometimes the loudest truths come in the quietest barks.